All right, so welcome everyone to the July SHRS Innovation Seminar. Our speaker today is Dr. Julie Cramer. Dr. Cramer earned her PhD from the University of Pittsburgh in pathology with a focus on intestinal stem cells and their link to intestinal cancer. She currently serves as the Associate Director of Clinical and Regulatory Affairs at Clinical Research Strategies, which is a Pittsburgh-based contract research organization. Prior to her time with CRS, Dr. Cramer served as the Immunotherapy Program Manager with Pitt Cyvello and a Technology Commercialization Associate with Pitt's Innovation Institute, where she supported commercialization alliances between the University of Pittsburgh and UPMC. So these are just a few things from her background, which I hope she shares more about with you today. And Dr. Cramer, you're an excellent addition to this SHRS Innovation Series, and the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you so much, Alex. I appreciate the introduction. I am really glad to be with you all here today. As you've heard, I've had my roots in academia, and so I hope to bring several different types of perspectives to this regulatory piece, because I know it can be a black box for most people, especially coming from academia and trying to get something, some technology commercialized. Started in academia, as she said, from the University of Pittsburgh, kind of bred there. And then I did do a few years actually in industry. So I joined a company that had actually licensed the technology from the University of Pittsburgh. So a little bit of experience on the commercialization side, a startup, brand new, first employee. So lots to learn there. So a little bit of perspective from that as well. And then my time back at the university with commercialization programs and also, at the Innovation Institute, which I know you all are familiar with through this series. So I'm excited to talk to you about that today. I'll also mention that I know from what I understand for this audience, medical device specific information is most useful. And so my talk will be geared towards medical devices. The regulatory pathway for medical device and drugs and biologics are very different. And you will find that medical devices, while it's not necessarily a more straightforward pathway when it comes to regulatory affairs, it is definitely and has more opportunities to interface with the FDA compared to that of drugs and biologics. So there's a little bit of an advantage, and with that point, mostly talking about the US at that point. So again, I'll focus all on medical devices today. If we want to hear at another time about drugs and biologics, happy to come back to talk about that. So with that, I'll start by talking a little bit about, let's see if I can get there we go. A little bit about clinical research strategies in and of itself. So it was formed in 2011 as a small enterprise of consultants by Alethea Wieland and David Link. And then in 2018, they rebranded with a new consulting team. And then in 2021, they started to hire full-time employees. And as we sit today in 2022, we have 11 employees and 15 expert consultants. So with that, we specialize in, quality, clinical, regulatory, and safety, kind of all over the life cycle of a product. We're, as Alexandra said, we are a consulting, executive consulting agency, essentially. So we pride ourselves on being able to solve just about any problem that a small to mid-sized company would come to us with, whether that be in any one of these clinical, quality, regulatory areas. If you have a problem, then we hope to be able to work very closely to fit for purpose to fill that gap for you. We have that wide range of expertise that we use to help our clients. So we also have expertise in risk management, continuous quality improvement paradigms, innovation and building companies from scratch is something that we have experience in. And we're very committed to regulatory science, policy, and reform, both in the US and the EU. Obviously, the greatest lessons that we have come from companies who failed for a variety of reasons, whether they squandered resources or refused to look ahead. So we benefit from those experiences and then take that to our next client and to help each client better going forward. So this is not meant to be comprehensive as far as, having you take a look at everything that CRS has to offer, but just the breadth of services that we do offer: compliance, governance, due diligence. We do offer contracting services. So if any company, any client needs, a short-term project manager for maybe 6 months, we can offer a certain number of hours or expertise for that for a week or two, or I'm sorry, for a short amount of time. We offer everything kind of on a contract basis to support clinical trials. So whether that's writing clinical trial protocols, informed consents, things like that to support a clinical trial. And then if you move over to clinical and regulatory affairs, we can actually run a clinical trial, whether that be med device or biologic, from soup to nuts. We can help with site identification, site management, actual monitoring of the sites during the clinical trial, all the way through to the case report, to the clinical report at the end of the trial. Also have a team for risk management and quality assurance, as well as policy and innovation. And in each of these areas, we have the expertise across many different modalities. Like I said, drugs and biologics, medical devices, in vitro diagnostics, digital therapeutics, much more. Many of our folks have a deep-rooted history in respiratory care, as well as infectious disease. I bring oncology experience. We have folks that have neurology experience, precision medicine, critical care, and onward. So, we really just pride ourselves on being very broad in nature, but we work with our clients to be very specific as to fitting whatever need they have in particular. We work very closely with the FDA and the EU for their meetings and submissions when it comes to regulatory documentation. We actually also help our clients with the NIH and DoD grants. We often collaborate with regulatory bodies and stakeholders for innovative methods. So moving beyond randomized controlled trials, looking at in silico trials, adaptive design, master protocols, platform trials, and the like. Trying to be innovative in and of ourselves, and staying top of our game. As I said, we also serve as a functional service provider for project management, clinical monitoring, medical monitoring, regulatory affairs, quality assurance, and also working with partners for data management and statistics. So again, we recognize the gaps that especially startup companies, they don't even know what they don't know sometimes. And so through conversations, we learn what the company's needs are and then work to fit those needs. We also understand that startup companies are oftentimes bootstrapped and they don't have a lot of funds. So we work with them in those cases as well to do what we can to support them with their limitations. All right, so I want to start into the regulatory piece by talking about the product life cycle. And again, this is going to be a focus on devices. So you're here in academic research and the tech transfer kind of area. So you work, the Innovation Institute well. I'm sure as Paul has been a part of this seminar series and put this together. You're performing your research and development, managing your intellectual property, figuring out the mechanism of action, risk benefit with the patient, and also diving into the literature and knowing what is current in the art. And then you're working on that tech transfer piece, really looking for, partners, where you have to get it to, where it's going to be actually of interest to somebody, or do you want to spin out a company? But then there's this whole piece of regulatory affairs, clinical trials, collecting clinical evidence, and how those two relate to one another is sometimes it's an intricate dance, because oftentimes you think, okay, well, I have to submit for regulatory approval, but I don't yet have clinical data. Well, how do I get clinical data if I don't have approval? So we're going to talk about that a little bit today and the dance between the two. We're going to talk a little bit about the FDA and the EU, rest of the world strategy when it comes to labeling, QMS, scalability. We'll talk about pre-submissions. Those pre-submissions are really where you have that prior conversation with the FDA before you submit a regulatory for regulatory approval. And the goal is to have oftentimes to get that initial clinical evidence, you want to start with the smallest innovative trials that have the highest % of win, so that you can keep your costs down, but also prove to the regulators that you have your device is safe and effective. And then you get to your actual regulatory submissions. And then after that, of course, is what people often see as the most exciting piece, which is the actual commercialization piece. We won't talk about that today, but that's about adoption, reimbursement, due diligence on the other side of regulatory clearance or regulatory approval. By the way, I know we have a small group today, so if anytime, I'll pause a couple of times during the talk today, but if anytime a question pops up, please feel free. Just let me know. So one of the first things you need to do when you're starting to embark on this regulatory pathway journey is to really very carefully define your device. In any regulatory submission, you are going to need to define your device over and over again in different ways. So you want to think about, what is your medical product? Describe your device, all its components, its accessories, and the way that it's used. You want to think about the mechanism of action, which is basically how it interacts with the patient. Does it treat the patient? Does it diagnose the patient? How invasive is it? And how invasive is it really gets to the question of risk. What level of risk is there to the patient, not only to the patient when it's used properly, but also to the patient if accident, if misuse does happen, how high is that risk? And so you want to look at there are three classes when it comes to risk. And this then determines next what type of regulatory submission you go with. So class 1, the lowest risk. So oftentimes these can be self-registered without what's called a 510K, and we'll go into what that is, or with a 510K. So this is something like a tongue depressor. Doesn't, at very low risk for the patient, the user, and very low risk even if it's used improperly. For class 2, that's the medium risk. Most 510Ks are class 2. Most 510K submissions are class 2. These are things like absorbable sutures, blood pressure cuffs, and the like. Again, now that's a medium risk. Most medical devices fall into this category. Then there's class 3, the highest risk. This will automatically require a pre-market approval or a PMA versus that of a 510K. It requires the highest amount of clinical evidence compared to the 510K or compared to the other two classes. And it's something like an implantable pacemaker. The risk is high for the patient, even if it's used correctly. And then if there's misuse, the risk is even higher. One of the other things that you really need to nail down is the intended use versus the indication for use. Your intended use is for a general description of what the device does. What's it used for? What's its purpose? It needs to be very to the point for your 510K submission, and it's displayed on the device label. So for example, if you have an insulin pen, the intended use is to inject insulin to maintain blood insulin levels. That's it. That's its intended purpose. It says nothing about the patient population, nothing about any other type of use. This is its purpose. The indication for use is different in that it's under a very specific set of circumstances that this device is to be used, either to diagnose, treat, prevent, cure, or mitigate a disease or condition, including a description of the intended patient population. So it talks about the conditions, the reasons for using the device. It can be on the label as well, or explained by the doctor, and it does not have to be to the point. It can be just more descriptive. For example, if we go back to our insulin pen example, it's for home use, reusable pen injector for single patient use by people with diabetes. So there's your disease indication or your condition. Under the supervision of an adult caregiver or by a patient of age 7 and older for self-injection of a desired dose of insulin. So that's the example there. You can see how it's expanded to a specific population and a specific indication for use. And I'm going to tie these all together with a flowchart in a minute, but I do want to talk first about what the specific types of device market approval applications there are. These are tied to risk and also to whether or not your device is first in class, or if there are other similar devices on the market already. So a 510K is again that which is tied to kind of a medium risk or a class 2 device. This is a pre-market notification approval submission. If you obtain a 510K, then it's 510K clearance. It's called a clearance. This is a submission made to the FDA to demonstrate the device is to be marketed is safe and effective. You're going to hear that over and over again. Safe and effective is what the FDA cares about. It needs to be the same as or substantially equivalent to a legally marketed device already in place in one of the three classification categories. That's called your predicate device. So I know you're saying, why do I want to be the same as something that's already on the market? Everybody's always telling me bigger, better, faster, set myself apart. Yes, true. And we'll come to that in a minute. But when you want a 510K, you've got to have a predicate device to compare yourself to. The reason is that if the predicate device has the same safety and effectiveness as your device, or if your device has the same safety and effectiveness as the predicate device, then you have a less steep clinical evidence barrier to get over than if you didn't have a predicate device, because someone has already done those studies in the predicate device. As long as you can say, my device meets those standards, what has already been done for that predicate device. So what you're doing in the 510K is just that. You're comparing your device to one or more predicate devices or legally similar, legally marketed devices. And you're going to make your claim that you are substantially equivalent to that device. You want, one of the main things is to have the same intended use, which we just talked about. So that same intended use, that very defined, injecting insulin into the bloodstream to increase insulin levels. Then you have a pre-market approval, all class 3, straight to PMA. This is where you don't have a predicate device and you also are class 3. So here you need to provide documentation that demonstrates the safety and effectiveness of the device for its intended use. So here you have to provide all the clinical evidence because you don't have a predicate to fall back on. You have to provide all of the clinical evidence. So there's, many more years of work to be done with a pre-market approval, but there's give and take all the time. Maybe if you're first in class and you're a high-risk device, then there's more to gain by being the first and having to provide all of that initial data. So I don't know that I explained class 3. I put the class 3 device description here, which are those that to support or sustain human life or of substantial importance in preventing impairment of human health, or which present a potential unreasonable risk of illness or injury. So that's kind of stuck that in here because all class 3 have to go under a PMA.
Hey, Jolie, thinking that PMAs are all class 3 devices, would you ever do a 510K and have a class 3 device as a predicate?
No, all class 3 have to be PMA, and you would not I don't think there's any case in which you would do a 510K for a class.
Well, what if you're a class 2, but your predicate device is a class 3? I'm just.
That's a great question. I think there's a possibility if somehow you're saying your class, you are a lower risk class than the class 3 that's already out there.
Right, and you're using that as a predicate, yeah.
So that might be possible, and that would be a question when we get to what a Q-sub and a pre-sub is, talking to the FDA. That would likely be a question for the FDA, and you would have to have your reasons. I think for whatever reason, this class 3 can be our predicate, so lower the bar for clinical evidence, but we're a class 2 for these reasons.
Right.
So we're going to do the 510K. That would probably, that you would definitely want to ask first, you check the guidances to see if there's any information out there from the FDA already. And then if there's not, then that's a question you ask before you prepare your submissions.
Thanks. Dog's barking.
That's okay. And another type of application is the de novo. So the de novo is just, what it says. It's from the beginning, something that hasn't been done before. There's no predicate. Nobody's done it before. It may be used in the future. Like if you get that de novo designation and get approval or clearance through the de novo pathway, your device can then be used as a predicate for someone else in the future for their own 510K. Initially, your device will be designated as a class 3 because it's new and the risks are not established. So that it's all about risk. If the risks are not established, then you've got to go into that de novo. You can end up in the de novo pathway. So there's two ways really that a device is determined to de novo. One is your 510K submission with a predicate has been determined to be not substantially equivalent. So you think it's equivalent, you put your whole submission around this one predicate, and the FDA says, no, not substantially equivalent. So sorry, you're going to have to be pushed to de novo. So that's one. Or two, you can go into a de novo saying, I request, there's no substantially equivalent device out there. So I'm going to request going into it proactively a de novo application. Okay, so hopefully that preface will then make this a little bit easier now that you heard some of the terminology already. So this is kind of putting together the risk with the type of application or the type of submission, what is required for each, and then like how long that kind of ties into how many years, because I know that's always important. So class 1, low risk, your 510K exempt, and often cases you can be on the market in weeks. Most of us are not going to land there. Most of us are going to land in class 2, medium risk. So you have some questions and different pathways to go to. If you have a predicate device and it's noted as significantly or substantially equivalent, then you can go the 510K pathway. The only data that you need is to show equivalence to the predicate. Typically, that's just benchtop saying I'm equivalent to the predicate for these reasons. The FDA says, okay, you're on the market in months. If you don't have a predicate device, like we said before, you can either go to the 510K de novo pathway. So you have to show data that's safety and effective, but oftentimes the bar isn't quite as high because you're only a medium risk on the market in years. But if you are shown to be a class 3, the other possibility then is your PMA. So you can be pushed to a PMA if the reason why there's no predicate device is that you're actually a higher risk. And so then you go to a pre-market approval, required full clinical data, and oftentimes manufacturing data as well. And you're on the market in years.
Julie,
so
a quick question on the predicate device. Is the predicate device approval based on the function or the form? So in other words, like for example, we work in wheelchair seat cushions. Yeah. And so there is a predicate wheelchair seat cushion out there and it's made of foam. And we invent one that's made up of, some elaborate, mechanical structure. But I know that people use the foam cushion as the predicate. Yeah. So yeah. I'm wondering, is that always the case? Is it based on what it does or what it is?
So the answer, I will come to the answer in another slide, but I will say that mostly it's it's all about safety and effectiveness. So even if your technical characteristics are different, your form is different. If it doesn't raise any new questions about safety and effectiveness, then you can likely use that predicate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that the class designation is one of the most important things to get right whenever you're then deciding what pathway to go on. Because if you decide I'm class 2, I've got a predicate, I'm going to 510K pathway, you make your submission, and then all of a sudden the FDA says, well, you're class 3. You did all that work and use those resources and time to do a 510K. That just isn't feasible because the FDA has come back and said, you're a class 3. So that's really important to do. All right. So what does the FDA have to say?
As well?
Yes, of course.
Is that 510K something that you can resubmit, or is that you get one predicate device that you can compare yourself to and you submit it one time? And if you get rejected or denied, then you have to go down to class 3?
So I don't know that it does start the conversation, and I do believe you get a chance to resubmit, or you can always submit a brand new one, referencing your old one.
Thank you. And yeah, it does. And it's just one predicate device that you're comparing yourself to. You can't compare yourself to a few.
So there are cases, typically you want to choose one predicate device. And then there's another class that you can use as a reference device. This oftentimes comes into play whenever you have a combination device that maybe you're combining, features from a couple of different predicates, where you would want to rely on safety and effectiveness data from a couple of different predicates that are combining different features that yours combines into one. And so really you want to try to have one, but again, this is going to be a question when we come to those prior conversations with the FDA. That could be something that you could talk to them about before you submit. You could provide your reasoning, say, we're either combining these two pieces, or this is why we want to use two predicates. Is that acceptable, or how should we approach it? And so that's, again, you're coming up with great questions that would be good to ask the FDA in a pre-submission conversation.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. So the FDA does provide this decision-making flowchart, and I know that it's small, but you can really just Google FDA 510K decision-making flowchart and find it for yourself. But I wanted to bring it up because it really leads you through what the FDA considers whenever you are considering whether or not a predicate is going to be classified as substantially equivalent or not substantially equivalent. So it's good to look at this ahead of time when you're choosing your predicate. So you start by identifying your new device and the predicate device. And I'm up here, I don't know if you can see my pointer at the top. Decision 1 is, excuse me, I think I need to use this guy. Laser pointer. Okay, we're up here. Decision 1 is the predicate device legally marketed? If it's not legally marketed, then you can't use it as a predicate device. What you want to do once you realize it is legally marketed, you want to review all the labeling and assure that it is consistent with the indications for use. That's what the IFU is here. Indication for use statements. So you're comparing those two between your device. That's why you need to define your device first, then go looking for your predicate device. So decision 2 is, do the devices have the same intended use? So I will say here that the intended use is the primary decision factor that the FDA uses to determine substantial equivalence of a predicate device, but the more similar, the better. So again, that intended use was the more broad term. The intended use of our insulin pen was injecting insulin to increase insulin levels in the bloodstream. Excuse me. And the indications for use was that specific condition, disease, diabetes. And so the more similar you are, the better there, but intended use has got to be the same. If yes, then you're going to review the design, the materials, the energy source, and all the features of the devices, compare the two of them. Decision 3 then is, do the devices have the same technical characteristics? So this is what Dave was getting at. So you can get most of this down here has nothing to do with the design, right? It just has to do with the intended use and the indications for use. When you get to the design, so this gets to, how can I be bigger, better, faster, and be up on all these predicate devices? I'm basically naming my competitor, right? And so I need to set myself apart. And that's where this comes in. So you can have different technical characteristics as long as they don't raise new questions of safety and effectiveness. If they do, then you're not substantially equivalent, and you either need to find yourself a new predicate device that does the same thing, or you're going to go into a de novo pathway. Does that make sense? Okay. So if they do not, if we're good to go, there's no new questions of safety and effectiveness, then we're going to review the proposed scientific methods for evaluating those different characteristics. You're going to need to prove or provide some kind of evidence that even though you have different characteristics, technical characteristics, it doesn't raise new questions. So that's what you're going to need to do next. Are the methods acceptable of how you have made that comparison? If they are, then you evaluate the performance data. And you move on to the last question, does the data demonstrate substantial equivalence? If it does, then you're good to go. The FDA, you've made it this far, they're going to say you're substantially equivalent. They'll then, clear your 510K as long as you've met all these requirements for your for your predicate device. Any questions on that? I know it's a lot, but I feel like the FDA did a pretty good job in putting this flow chart together. Okay. So here's the question. How do I get clinical data without FDA approval? Well, in the drug world, this would be called an IND, an investigational new drug. In the device world, we have an investigational device exemption, an IDE. So this is for medical devices, for software. This allows an investigational device that is not approved to be on the market to be used in a clinical study in order to collect safety and effectiveness data. Again, it's all about safety and effectiveness. So these clinical studies are most often conducted to support a PMA, or if you need to support, a de novo, you might do that as well. Only a small percentage of these IDEs are used to support 510Ks. They're oftentimes not needed because you have that predicate data, the data from the predicate device. All clinical evaluations of an investigational device, unless it's exempt, must have an approved IDE before the clinical study can be initiated. And these clinical evaluation of devices that have not been cleared for marketing, but are working on being cleared for a clinical trial or a clinical study requires an investigational plan that has been reviewed by an IRB. If it is a significant risk device, then the IDE also must be approved by the FDA. It must have an informed consent for all patients, labeling stating that it is an investigational device for only investigational use. The study requires monitoring that you would for any other clinical study and requires records and reports. And then this type of clinical study that you perform under an IDE is where you get the clinical data to support your PMA application. All right. So there's a lot of different things that go into this decision. How do you de-risk this process to be most effective, most efficient with your resources, with your time, and enhance the ability or enhance the chances of actually getting clearance? I'm going to give you two ways. One way is through a regulatory pathway assessment. Essentially, that's hiring someone like me to elucidate the state of the art, which is somewhat done if you're working on your intellectual property with the Innovation Institute. Oftentimes they'll get the your prior arts in when you're doing that type of intellectual property strategy. But we'll look at the state of the art as it comes to predicates. We'll look at product codes, understanding what code we might want to submit under, looking at predicates or novelty. So is there really a predicate out there that we can use, or is your best bet going to be de novo? Our primary goal is to identify an optimal regulatory pathway option for you. We want the shortest time to clearance, obviously, the lowest risk of FDA refusal, claims that achieve the greatest market share, as well as parallel development of data to support CMS coverage. So as you can see, a regulatory pathway assessment, which is usually, I think, about 30, 50 pages of information, it supports what decision you want to make when it comes to a regulatory pathway, but it also can provide information that's helpful in product development as well as a business strategy when it comes to how you want to move forward as well. The second way you can de-risk the process is really moving into I've been referring to this the whole time, pre-submission or Q-submission. These are really communications you have with the FDA before submitting a PMA, a 510K, a de novo request, or even an IDE. You request formal feedback on your device and on your plan before you submit. So this is a way to de-risk it. It takes a little bit more time, but then you're going to be more efficient in your plan and implementing your plan. This is an opportunity for you to ask specific questions regarding your planned IDE or your marketing submission. So you want to obviously go in with a plan. You want to say, going back to the one question that was asked, you want to say, look, we have these X, Y, and Z reasons for having multiple predicates listed. Is that acceptable? Kind of, what do you think? Very specific questions. You want to talk about questions on your non-clinical design, your non-clinical testing protocols. If you are designing clinical studies, talk about the design of your clinical studies and the acceptance criteria, those types of questions. These Q-subs are important and appropriate when the FDA's feedback on specific questions is necessary to guide the development or submission preparation. This early interaction with the FDA on planned non-clinical and clinical studies and careful consideration of the feedback. One mistake clients often make is they don't agree with the FDA, so then they just go ahead with what they thought, and that just wastes the entire purpose of the Q-sub. You want to consider the FDA's feedback and how it might improve the quality of subsequent submissions. It's going to shorten the total review times because the FDA has already seen it. It's going to facilitate the development process for new devices. And these interactions are really made to contribute to a more transparent review process, both for you as the submitter and for the FDA. The easier you make the FDA's job in this, the better off you are for the end result. All right, I'm going to stop there for just a few minutes and see if there's any questions. Want to make sure I answer questions, but then I do have just kind of the rest of it is what is it like to meet with the regulators and things like that. So are there any questions for the content so far?
I had one question regarding the claims that you can make. I think it was 2 slides back.
Okay.
Right. So you had mentioned that you can include the claims for your device in your document as you're submitting it. When it comes to regulating the claims that you're making, once you're in the market, so you have a marketing team and they decided that they want to talk about this is the best product that you use for this. We're better than this other product. Are those also things that kind of have to be mentioned beforehand, or is that something that that would be allowed after the fact?
So, I think I understand your question. So I'm going to answer it one way, and you can tell me if I answer it correct. If I answer your question.
Yes,
so,
of course.
I do want to be very specific here that we're not talking just because you all might be working with the Innovation Institute on patent claims. This is not the same as patent claims. In fact, I should probably change that term. We're talking here mostly about the intended use that you set. So if you get clearance, a 510K clearance for a specific intended use, that is the only intended use you are allowed to market for.
That makes so much more sense. Thank you so much. Yeah.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. I don't know if anybody here has actually had the chance to meet with regulators before. I have not been on one of these calls myself. So some of this is third-party information, but it's helpful, I think, for you to know, what you're getting into, what to expect. It's not a scary thing. Understand that regulators are not adversaries, right? They are federal and there are federal and international regulators that must put patients first. They must protect the patients first. That's what they're there for. And obviously nobody here that's, inventing, and an innovator, nobody wants to impart harm on any patient, but there's a check and balance there. Post-market problems have happened, which have led to higher scrutiny and policy reform. The whole point of, and I've said it over and over, the 510K and the regulatory approval pathway is to scientifically prove safety and effectiveness, efficacy. Quality integrity of the documentation that you're submitting in these regulatory submissions and the data collected must be proven. The risk benefit of the device must be well defined and substantiated per the regulations. And we encourage you to embrace the challenges that lie ahead in the regulatory, in your regulatory journey. The point of it is to create devices and make offerings of devices or drugs or wherever you are that are safe and effective to patients. The more that you embrace the challenge now of fitting into those categories, it is better and speaks more to the higher probability for success commercially and in making an impact in patients' lives in the future. And let me also, this is kind of an aside, but we did put it on the slide. Europe, the EU is no longer the cheaper and faster location to launch a medical device compared to the US. Excuse me. This is something that I heard about all the time. Whenever I was a graduate student, it was like everybody took their medical devices to the EU because it was easier, it was faster to get to the market. Since the EU put into place their new MDR, medical device regulations, that's just not the case anymore. And so I do have another slide on that if we get to it, but just a heads up, that's the state of where we are in the US versus the EU. The US strategy, you want to prepare for your submission. You want to read the relevant guidance documents for meeting requirements and timing. I had no idea whenever I got into this, that the FDA had so many relevant guidances out there. Now, guidances are not law, guidances are not requirements, but the FDA puts together many informal guidances for specific types of medical devices, specific types of drugs. You go out and you want to be well educated or have someone well educate you what the guidances are that are relevant for your device, for your technology. Because someone may have already asked all the questions and the FDA had enough people asking those questions that they developed a specific guidance on it. You certainly don't want to go into an FDA meeting and have them say, well, doesn't seem like you've read this guidance out there, go read it. That would be a waste of your time and a waste of the FDA's time. You want to look at the early discussions with the FDA as a way to de-risk your product and your trials program. Some example questions that are the most important to talk about with the FDA is your pilot trial data protocol, whether or not your device, sometimes this comes into play with some in vitro diagnostics where it's a wellness device versus an actual medical device. Are medical decisions being made, or is it just for the patient's information? You want to confirm your equivalence. So you want to talk about your predicate device that you've selected. And there's also something that I won't talk a lot about today for time, but there's something called a breakthrough device designation request. And essentially, if you are brand new, if you are breaking barriers with your device, then you would submit something called a breakthrough device designation. And if you are given this designation, then you are oftentimes entered into what could be called kind of an expedited regulatory process. So you have these deep conversations with the FDA, and they're kind of go with you a lot further along in the process. All right. So what is the planning meeting? What does the meeting look like? So you submitted your pre-sub, you've requested an in-person or virtual meeting. What does the meeting look like? Well, and how do you want to prepare for it? So once you have the meeting plan, you want to prepare a brief slide deck, assess the personnel who's going to attend. A lot of times, if we have clients that we're helping with the Q submission, we will have two of our own attend the meeting so that one person can facilitate the conversation and one person can take notes. You are not allowed to record the sessions. And so everything that's said, you want to write down. You rehearse ahead of time, so you're most efficient with your time because it goes really fast. You need to be ready, especially if written feedback has not been requested. And the sponsor is responsible. The client is responsible for the meeting minutes. So you want to make sure that you write these down. It goes in, it's part of the permanent record. Okay, so the EU, why is it so difficult anymore? Well, to keep an eye on the time. The MDR has changed access to the EU. The strategy should include, if your strategy should include EU, you want to pay special attention to timing and potential use of US data or the rest of world data. You want to look very carefully at the risk-benefit profile because that is still a top consideration for the EU. The risk management profile, early evidence, literature as far as the state of the art goes, and objective clinical evaluation. And with this, all bets are off. It is too difficult right now to predict how easy or difficult it will be to access the market in the EU. There are only several dozen notified bodies comparable to the FDA, that are MDR certified. So it's and they have a deficit in talent and notified bodies to understand the new regulation. So it's just difficult right now. Not impossible, it's just difficult. So you need to be aware of that as you move forward. Any questions on that? Just have a little bit left here. I'm going to go through this a little quickly, but considerations for creating a compendium of evidence. Obviously, it's very costly, so you want to be very careful about what you do. You want to consider your stakeholders and make sure that what you're going to provide provides clear proof that the device does what it claims it's going to do. You want to start small with a proof in concept, trial, early feasibility, training sets, non-significant risk studies if possible. It doesn't necessarily need to have statistical significance early on or be meaningful in that way. The point is to start publishing. The point is to start attracting more investment for larger trials. So obtaining regulatory buy-in early before moving on to larger pivotal trials. This is all the different study types that you can consider. There's many different ones when it comes to medical devices. I won't go over each of them here. Human factors is an interesting one, especially for medical devices that are going to be used by patients or individuals. This is really just tests your labeling. How well do your patients, do your end users use your labeling? So you would have, folks come in, especially if it's like a small handheld device or whatever, and you would give them the instructions for use and see how well your labeling is used and where you can clarify for decreasing misuse of the device. Of course, there is a weighted scale still towards the gold standard, pivotal or randomized controlled trials that prove either superiority to other treatments or standard of care, or non-inferiority to a standard of care. But more recently, there has been a use of in silico and real-world evidence studies. Some of this evidence and some of this data can be potentially be used for regulatory decision-making. So you want to keep that in mind as well. For publications, you want to think about high impact journals, low impact, quick online publications. There's a give and take there. White papers, voice of the customer. I know Innovation Institute has the first year program to really help understand that customer and how that plays into your whole business plan, as well as how you may be able to modify your device and make it more user friendly. So in summary, the lessons I've helped you with today is to define your device, know your intended use, your indications for use, your mechanism of action. Meet with the regulators early and often for key agreement and understanding ahead of your trials. This will save you time in the long run. Establish a strategy for clinical evidence generation. Reflect clinical evidence in your publication program. Have an idea of how you're going to get the word out with your clinical evidence, and consider all of the different stakeholders in order of importance. And with that, I will take any additional questions. I'm really glad to be with you today, and I'm really appreciative of Paul for inviting me to speak with you.
Thanks so much. We really appreciate it. I was going to say, you've been answering questions throughout as well, so thank you very much for doing that. And I think anyone have any final questions for? Well, I would say maybe we could put your email in the chat in case, after reflecting on all this information, anyone has any more questions or additional details, or you could just get it right off the screen there. That would work too. Perfect. Already ahead of that. But yeah, so that would be great. So thank you so much for everything. And I'll do.
You're welcome.
We don't have any other. Do we have any other questions from the audience in the meantime? I'll go ahead and talk about what next month's seminar has in store.
Yeah, I would just say, I'm again so happy to have been here with you today. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, do that. We offer clinical research strategies. If you check out our website, we also have a resources page. We are very involved in our community here in Pittsburgh and across the region. We are a sponsor of the Biomedical Breakfast every Tuesday. We know it takes a village to really be kind of have Pittsburgh rise up when it comes to the life sciences in industry. And we really want to be a part of that. We're also a sponsor of Women in Bio, understanding the importance of that. We're putting together an event in October for Women in Bio. Alethea just knows the importance of being part of our community, and we pride ourselves on that. On our webpage, you'll see articles that our experts write continually, just every month. We just put out a precision medicine series. We have 2 out already, one on oncology that I wrote myself, and then one on ophthalmology came out the month after that. We have those posted on our website and on LinkedIn. We have 2 more parts coming to that. One is on regulatory and precision medicine, and the other one is in epigenetics, I think, in precision medicine. So, great resources on our website. We'd be happy to help you out and reach out.